This is Visual Massacre, and we're sitting down with Merciful Mike. And like we did earlier with Randy, we're going to get a promoter's perspective on shows and what's coming up and a few other things. So we'll start off with, you've been doing Days of the Doom. This is your fourth fest.
This is my fourth year, correct.
So why don't you give us a little history of how you came about deciding you wanted to do this style and everything else?
First and foremost, I've always been a fan of metal. You know, any type of band or anything. I started off with Kiss as a kid and evolved into Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. And those are my springboard bands. Those are my introductory. But through the years, I've always appreciated the Doom genre. Trouble was a huge deal for me as a kid. Saw Trouble several times. And you know, later in life, as you get the freedom to travel a little bit, I used to go to other Doom Fest. Went to Templars of Doom in Indianapolis with Jason McCash from Gates of Slumber. Put that on for 3 years.
Sure.
Would travel to Baltimore. There were several fests out there. The Born to be Doom Fest that John Gallo and John Brenner and Josh Hart had a hand in. And it basically, those experiences just planted the seed where I thought, well, maybe I can pull something like this off. And you know, it grew from my love of the genre and the music and the bands and the camaraderie of the bands and the fans as one. So back in 2011, I decided we'll try it, and the very first one was right here in Kenosha. And I really only expected ever to do one fest, but the response I got and people wanting more, and then the response from other bands as well wanting to participate, that's kind of what grew it into what it is today.
So when you initially started your Doomfest, how'd you go about getting bands on the bill? How'd you make your contact or decide to get even some of the little more obscure ones that most people may have slipped by and not noticed?
Right. Well, back when I started in 2011, MySpace was still a viable social media source. So we would reach out to bands that were on MySpace, bands that I had already seen. That's one nice thing about being the promoter or the fest organizer, is that you do have that guilty pleasure of picking out bands that you yourself like.
Sure,
so
of course.
I went that route right away, and then through other bands, it would open doors to other ones, and you would check them out, and it just kind of organically grew that way. So basically, it was just a reach out. I told them we're going to try something new. We got a lot of East Coast bands. We got a lot of Southern bands. Some from Minnesota, the Midwest. And it all really worked out quite well from there.
Now, with the bands, they're all basically stateside bands. In the future, you probably going to be doing more festivals, hopefully. Have you been even thinking about having maybe one or two bands international come, if possible?
This year we have. We've tried in previous years. We ran into a problem, which is why we actually moved to Milwaukee. The building that housed our venue from the first fest here in Kenosha closed up, and we moved to Milwaukee, which ended up in a change of dates. And I had Rituals at the Oak from Australia that were going to play. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. But Days of the Doomed has always had bands from literally all over the country. A lot of them from the East Coast, down south. Last year we finally pulled in a couple from the West Coast, but this year, finally, which I'm elated about, we have Age of Taurus coming from the UK. And I think now that we've kind of broken that wall down, Future Fest, I think we're going to be able to pull in others as well. So, yeah, the European flavor for the fest is a big deal, and I'm really happy with that. Definitely, Future Fest, I think you're going to see more from, you know, whether it's Germany, the UK, Sweden, Norway. It's definitely in the making. It's in the back of my mind.
No, that's a good thing. With now this being your fourth basic festival, you pretty much start the day after one festival starts for planning for the next year?
I do.
Or you give yourself a little week vacation and go from there?
Well, I always tell everybody the day after the fest, I kind of, you know, knock myself out on Air Supply and REO Speedwagon. It's kind of a joke, but yeah, it is. It's a year-long venture. As soon as one is done, we normally do go right into it. This year's a little bit different because after last year, which was our third year, a lot of people may or may not realize there's a lot of out-of-pocket expense that comes to put on a fest like Days of the Doom. You don't always recoup that. I was in the position where I was able to do the out-of-pocket expenses to pull off the fest, make sure things were going well, and
Sure,
you
sure.
know, leading into this year, unfortunately, I wasn't in that position, and I just kind of remained silent after the third fest. Normally, we're right back at it. We're talking about bands and ramping it up. And a few people kind of took notice that it was silent in the Days of the Doom camp, and luckily, and some very gracious, generous people stepped up to the plate to ensure that we will have the fourth installment this year. So, Kimmy Rudolph and the Metal Deli, MHX Radio is back on board, In the Pit Radio from Cleveland. Actually, Mark Weiner from Earth and Grave was integral in getting things rolling again. So, we were a little bit behind the ball this year getting things going, but not that any prior year was anything less, but this year is probably our biggest year ever with the bands we have involved and everything, and I owe it to some really good friends to make sure that we were going to do the fest again.
Now, with it being a 21 show only, was that something that was forced on you, or did you figure that was still just because of the genre of music, most people would prefer it?
The first year where I took it all upon myself to rent the venue,
Mm-hmm.
and everything involved with that was a major issue, and the insurance policies involved with that definitely led me to be an only 21 and over. Now that we've moved it up to Milwaukee to the Metal Grill, kind of the same rule applies, and it's the municipalities of the city of Cudahy where it's a 21 over show. Now that things have changed a little bit at that venue, where we could possibly do an 18 over show,
Mm-hmm.
because they've instilled it as a little bit more of a restaurant with the kitchen opening up. It's kind of come down to a judgment call on myself.
Well, with that, you having promoted that for a while, do you have any other shows you promote?
I do. As we spoke earlier, I have my own management and production company with an extremely good friend of mine, Tony Spillman, who plays with Earth and Grave and Spillage. We've been doing this for about a year now, and the response has been overwhelming. We've got several bands on our roster, and we've been talking about taking it to the next logical step, which could possibly lead to us starting our own label. But I've got tons of things going on. I manage Eric Wagner, from original vocalist from Trouble, and his new band Blackfinger, and I just recently wrapped up confirming a bunch of East Coast dates as well as Midwest, and after those we're looking to shoot them down south. Spillage has definitely got some dates coming up here in the Midwest. They will be going down south. We're going to hit Little Rock, New Orleans, Dallas for a festival. And I've also got Pale Divine from Pennsylvania. I've got Frosttown, which is a black and thrash band from North Dakota that's amazing. They have a new album coming out, so you'll see a lot of push from them. And then even locally, there's a band called Electric Revolution, which I think you and I talked about a little bit, which features former members from Nick Fury along with Joey Gajan.
Okay.
Absolutely fantastic band. I was able to get them the opening slot for Gilby Clarke, and they've played a couple of shows since in the area, and now we're kind of just taking it easy. We want to make sure that each step that we do is done the correct way, and we're going to get them out and about.
Why don't you give us some websites where they can contact you if they feel maybe they'd be a good fit for another Doomfest, or
Sure, absolutely.
Seeing what you're doing for possibly a label and a few other things. So why don't you throw out a couple websites for us if you can?
Type in Merciful Mike, you'll find me. Otherwise, anything that's related to Days of the Doomed, www.daysofthedoom.com. Anything you need. It's a literal one-stop shop. We have tickets. You can pick them up there. Traveling, lodging options are there. We have all of the time slots for the bands for the entire weekend. Every little bit of information that you need for the fest to make your weekend perfect can be located at www.daysofthedoom.com.
I appreciate you talking to us, Mike.
Absolutely.
Best of luck with your
Thank
fourth installment.
Thank you very much, Bruce.
Come
I
to see the
appreciate it.
fifth one next year.
Absolutely.
Thank
you.
you.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.